Hello, how are you all? I hope you're doing well. It's dark for a reason because we're going to talk about dark things. That's actually not why it's dark. But the Great Reset. This is something I haven't really discussed on this channel a lot, but I thought now would be a good time to maybe bring it up. And I'm just going to read you a few things and you make the connection as you will. But I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. And so the Great Reset. What is that? It came from the World Economic Forum, and I'll read you what it says on their webpage right now. I'll link to it below if you want to look more into it. But it says, quote, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. And this is from the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Follow insights on how we can recover from COVID-19 to build a healthier, more equitable, and more prosperous future. So there you have that word. You have that word equity. What is equity? Well, you have equality and you have equity. So you can either have equality of opportunity, which is equality, which means that we are all given the same amount of opportunities and we decide what we do with our lives. So usually the harder you work, the more it pays off, things like that. Or you have equality of outcome, which is equity. And that means that we all end up at the same outcome. No matter where we start, we're all at the same outcome. And that's why a lot of people are very critical. When you hear the word equity, keep that in mind. That's basically what it means. So that's what it says on the World Economic Forum. And earlier, I think it was 2020, earlier in 2020, an ad came out by the World Economic Forum where they were talking about the future. You will own nothing and you will be happy. So a lot of people were really critical because of that. It was the whole video, in my opinion, was a little creepy. And it was just talking about how you're not going to own your home. You're not going to own belongings or anything like that. Everything will be rented. All that goodness. So that's how all of this talk about the Great Reset started, and people think that it's what it actually is a big redistribution of wealth and sort of a new way that our economy will work. And it appears to be a little anti-capitalist, I believe. You can look through it. Anyway, that's what it is, and it's something that I paid attention to a little bit, not too much, but it's been popping up. Well, recently I've thought about it a little bit more, and I'll tell you why. So a few things popped up. I read a really interesting article about Bill Gates and The Guardian the other week, so I'll go through a little bit of that with you. And there was a Twitter thread recently that went completely viral today. I believe it's still trending, so I'm going to go through a little bit of that with you, and I'll link everything down below if you want to really look into it yourself, because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's just very interesting, and you make the connection as you will, or if you don't think there's a connection. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. I've never really talked about things like this before, but and you also think about, a lot of people were saying this about the Great Reset, how it's going to be a redistribution of wealth and this and that. And when you first hear about it, you think to yourself, what a huge conspiracy theory. That's what you think. Big conspiracy theory. And then you see what happened during the pandemic, and it makes you think, what happened? It was sort of a redistribution of wealth. You had companies like Amazon who just, increased their revenue like crazy, and you saw small businesses that were shuttered. I recently watched a video. So you guys know I live in West Hollywood, or that's where my residence is. I've been staying with my family for a little bit, but that's where I live and where I came here from. And I remember when I lived there, I did notice I would drive down certain roads and I noticed that a lot of businesses were closed and not opening back up. One of the where I live, I can tell you now, I don't live there right now, but I lived right below Sunset Boulevard, and I lived next to a hotel. It's called the Standard Hotel. It's kind of like a modern hotel. It's definitely not historic, but it's kind of a landmark a little bit, a more modern landmark on Sunset Boulevard. And the first place I ever stayed when I visited California, that closed during the pandemic, and I think it was because they couldn't renew their contract. They couldn't afford it, or they couldn't pay for that. It was something to do with that, but they closed. And I would notice when I would drive on certain streets that all these businesses you would see where businesses once were. All you see now are empty businesses and a for lease sign. And I recently watched a video on YouTube. It was posted a week ago. I don't know who the YouTuber was, but really all this person was doing was driving through West Hollywood. He drove down Santa Monica Boulevard, I believe, Sunset Boulevard, a little bit in Beverly Hills, and certain areas that were high-end area, like regular areas and high-end areas. It was unbelievable how many for lease signs they were, how many businesses had left and weren't coming back. We talk about how businesses suffered, but not a lot about how many of them completely pulled out and were done and are not coming back. So that was really interesting to see, because I even lived in West Hollywood, but I didn't realize how bad it was because I never just took a drive throughout my entire neighborhood. And I would say it was probably about 30% of the businesses, maybe more than that. I'm not very good at guessing those types of numbers. So you see things like that and it makes you think. Anyway, that being said, let's get into this Twitter thread. So this is cultural husbandry, and like I said, this went completely viral. I will link to the entire thing below if you want to go through and read it on your own. But here it is. Listen to this. Warning, thread. I like when they put thread at the top. It says, Blackrock is buying every single family house they can find, paying 20 to 50% above asking price and outbidding normal home buyers. Why are corporations, pension funds, and property investment groups buying entire neighborhoods out from under the middle class? Let's take a look. Homes are popping up on MLS and going under contract within a few hours. Blackrock, among others, are buying up thousands of new homes and entire neighborhoods. So, who is Blackrock? Only the world's largest asset manager and the leading proponent of the Great Reset. They're looking to redistribute, get this, $120 trillion, the entire wealth of the world's middle class and poor, combined several times over. As an example, by the way, if you go through this thread, there's tons of articles and sources that you can look into and read for yourself. And I always encourage you, read stuff for yourself and then decide on your own. As an example, a 124 new home neighborhood was bought in its entirety in Texas. Average Americans were outbid to the tune of $32 million. Homes sold at an average of 20% above listing. Now the entire neighborhood is made up of serfs. What are serfs? Single-family rentals. Now your potential lower to middle class homeowner is positioned to be a permanent renter. This matters because for the lower and middle class, owning a home is the most major part of any financial success and the future of upward mobility. This is wealth redistribution. And it ain't rich people's wealth that is getting redistributed. It's normal American middle class, salt to the earth wealth heading into the hands of the world's most powerful entities and individuals. The traditional financial vehicle is gone forever. Home equity is the main financial element that middle class families use to build wealth. And Blackrock, a Federal Reserve funded financial institution, is buying up all the houses and making sure that young families can't build wealth. That's right. Federal Reserve funded financial institute. Let that sink in for a minute. Got it? They are using your tax dollars to F the lower and middle class, and it's permanent. Number one, presidential administration of BS. This is a fundamental reorganization of society. So where does this position the average American in 30 years when it's given that every new neighborhood is to be bought up whole so they can be utilized as serfs? It positions them as peasants. Being poor can be a temporary condition bettered by upward mobility. In the U.S. and other nations, home ownership is often the first and most vital step. This can provide for generational wealth and success. But as permanent guaranteed renters, you are peeing away a lifetime of equity and the chance for mobility. You become a peasant. So, it goes on to argue how this is proving that the Great Reset is real. So I'll link to it below if you want to read more into that. But here's something else that came on my radar recently that I wasn't aware of. And if you know about Bill Gates and where he stands on all of this, whatever you think of him, I just thought this was interesting. And I actually got this article from Russell Brand, of all people, who I don't agree with him on a lot, but what I appreciate about him is he's willing to think about things and look into things, which I find admirable. And I've been listening to him a little bit more because of that. I don't agree with everything he says, but I like the fact that he is a curious mind. So this says, this is an article in The Guardian by Nick Estes, and it says, Bill Gates is the biggest private owner of farmland in the United States, which I was not aware of. The beginning of this article will go in to tell you exactly how much farmland he owns, what he paid for it, where it is, so you can read. I'll link to this below too. But here we go. Okay, so I'm going to read. And by the way, the person that wrote this article, if you read the beginning, this is a person that seems to be a little bit more on the left, or probably has different political beliefs than you and I. It says, this is the middle part of the article. It says, our era is dominated by the ultra-rich, the climate crisis, and a green capitalism. And Bill Gates' new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, positions himself as the thought leader on how to stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and how to fund what he has called elsewhere a global green revolution to help poor farmers mitigate climate change. What expertise in climate science or agriculture Gates possesses beyond being filthy rich is anyone's guess. So this is another, a lot of people are saying this is another thing that they're going to try to use to push the Great Reset. They're going to try to use climate change. When pressed during a book discussion on Reddit about why he's gobbling up so much farmland, Gates claimed it's not connected to climate change. The decision, he said, came from his investment group, Cascade Investment. The firm making these acquisitions is controlled by Gates. The firm said it's very supportive of sustainable farming. It also is a shareholder in the plant-based protein companies Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, as well as the farming equipment manufacturer John Deere. His firm's largest farmland acquisition happened in 2017, when it acquired 61 farming properties from a Canadian investment firm to the tune of $500 million. Arable land is not just profitable. There's a more cynical calculation. Investment firms are making the argument farmlands will meet carbon neutral targets for sustainable investment portfolios while anticipating an increase in agricultural productivity and revenue. And while Bill Gates frets about eating cheeseburgers in his book for the amount of greenhouse gases the meat industry produces largely from consumption of rich countries, his massive carbon footprint has little to do with his personal diet and not forgivable by simply buying more land to sequester more carbon. This is interesting. The world's richest 1% emit double the carbon of the poorest 50%. A 2020 study found, according to Forbes, the world's billionaires saw their wealth swell by 1.9 trillion in 2020, while more than 22 million U.S. workers, mostly women, lost their jobs. Like wealth, land ownership is becoming concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, resulting in a greater push for monocultures and more intensive industrial farming techniques to generate greater returns. 1% of the world's farms control 70% of the world's farmlands, one report found. The biggest shift in recent years from small to big farms in the U.S. There you have it, and I don't know if all of this is connected. Oh, here's another article. I'll link to this below too if you want to look into it. This is The Atlantic, how Wall Street might be your landlord. And again, I don't know if it's all connected. I don't know what it means as far as the Great Reset, but I do know what's happening with Blackrock. It's wrong. It's just wrong. I don't even know how something like that is legal. I don't know too much about the housing market. But when you're outbidding people, regular homeowners, when you're outbidding them by 30 to 50%, buying up in entire neighborhoods, how are families supposed to even have a chance? So let me know what you guys think about everything, and I'll see you later. Bye.